Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Oren Phillips.
I'm Joe Marcello.
I'm Mike Farah.
And today we have a really cool episode for you. We have an interview with Mishkin and Gary Cohn. They're a writing team best known for their work in DC in the 80s, but they've also worked on a number of books since then together and separately. So it's interesting to hear their dynamic and how they worked together for all the years.
Yeah, they've been pretty integral in creating a number of characters over the years, one of which is Amethyst, which has now come back into continuity as a pretty big character. She is a part of Gemworld, as I recall, and she's been integral in, I think, reintroducing the 90s era Superboy back into continuity, I guess, with various changes over the years. And old 52, new 52, that character went away, but through her storyline, he was able to come back. So I was excited about that.
Yeah, another one of their calling cards is Blue Devil. They created the character and sort of had the definitive run with him. Interesting, weird corner of the DC universe, sort of like the Mask meets maybe Ghost Rider, because stunt guy who happens to become this character after he puts on a disguise. Interesting stuff if you can seek it out. Let's see what they had to say. This is Gary Cohn and Mishkin.
So my first question would be for the two of you is that you've been friends for such a long time. You've worked on so many things. What's the basic gist of your collaborative process? Do you pitch ideas to each other and then formulate where you want to go from it? Or you just say, oh, I like this, and okay, let me help you along with this.
So Dan and I, over the past 30 years, I guess, since the 1990s, have certainly spent time talking to each other about projects that we were individually working on. But we have not worked together on anything in all that time, as far as I can remember. Does that sound about right?
I think that's right. Before then, we just shared a brain and, whatever.
Somebody, a radical surgery was called for, I suppose,
Gary had a girlfriend once who watched us talking about a story idea, and she was like, "What just went on here?" It's sort of more than completing each other's sentences. It's some sort of nuclear reaction or something.
And I suspect if we had something to do again, it wouldn't take long to fall back into that.
Right.
Oh, we did it. We talked. We had a conversation, and as the conversation went on, what's Dan Cassidy going to do against the Rogues Gallery, something like that. It was like ping pong, back and forth, idea. Let's do this. I don't like that. What do you think? And it was very much an ongoing conversation where we had the respect for each other to not get upset if one of us came up with something the other liked and it was dismissed, or
right.
There was no ego. We were in sync. And when we were doing these things, first draft of a plot and send it to the other one, who would do some revising. We talk about it again. And then the person who had taken the first crack at the plot would wait for the other person to take the first crack at the full script, if there was going to be one. Or when we agreed on a plot and it went to an artist and the art came back, maybe the guy who had done the original plot wasn't the one who did the first draft of the script. And then we'd go back and forth and we'd keep modifying.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And there was a lot of, as far as, the times when we were sort of batting around ideas, there was a lot of, no, wait, what about this?
Right.
And, and that would just happen. I think for the most part, when it comes to Amethyst and Blue Devil, Gary took more of the lead on Blue Devil. I mean, we plotted together, and then afterward, you took more of the lead on Blue Devil, and I tended to on on Amethyst, at least at the beginning, but it was like 40 years ago. So.
I think so. And so it always leaves me puzzled with how come when we divided them, we divided exactly backwards from that. You took Blue Devil and I took Amethyst, and I don't recall why. I don't understand why. I certainly had a better working relationship with Alan Gold than I did with Karen Berger. And I think you had a fine working relationship with either of them. I do not know why that happened.
Well, the Amethyst part was that I was really disappointed in the direction of the ongoing series, which you may not know, but Gary knows, was really imposed on us. We were asked, we were first told that you got 12 issues to do whatever you can. I mean, it's like fantastic. They're doing this project about a magical girl when there's nothing like that, and no reason to think that DC should have any interest in doing something like that. But they weren't so crazy as to say, and take as many issues as you like. So they gave us the 12 issues and said, tell your whole story. And then we had interest in the property from the Kenner Toy Company. Okay. And we had great meetings with the Kenner people. They put Gary and me up, and they serve us meals all day. And Ernie came in, and we talk about all this stuff. And the thing of it was that they did not want Kenner to be looking at a project that was dead, as far as comics were concerned. Come up with a new series. So you'll see the storyline about Princess Emerald come up in the latter half of the maxi series in order to set up the ongoing series. But I just really ended up feeling like we had done what we wanted to do. And I said, Gary, you can do it. And so, and he could, but things didn't always
things didn't play out quite that way.
That's right.
Did that leave a sour taste in your mouth, though? I mean, going forward with other projects, or did you look at this as a one-time or a one-count situation?
I mean, things don't generally leave a sour taste in my mouth. Now it distresses me that we don't have creative control over the characters that we created. But we knew that going in, like more than half our lifetimes ago. And it didn't seem like such a big deal. That seems different to me now. That leaves me feeling a little blue sometimes.
And I think I hold grudges more than Dan does.
Oh, absolutely.
and I feel that DC didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't recognize the value of the properties. Both of them, I thought.
Yeah.
Both Amethyst and Blue Devil had big potential. Both, but Amethyst especially. And I see people even now say, DC's got this whole world and a magical princess, and they've done nothing with it. That's right. They've done nothing with it.
That's right. CBR just had 6 DC characters that should have their own movies, and one was Amethyst. And it's like, this is almost history now, that DC historically ignores the fact that it has this great property.
Right.
And
no matter who's in charge, no matter who's the regime, it just seems to be that way.
It does.
They dropped the ball in many ways. I've told this story a zillion times. Kenner took an option for your option on the property, but Kenner was going through a massive reorganization, and they were getting beat by Mattel. They're getting clobbered by Mattel. Had DC end up with Kenner when DC had been working with Mattel on the He-Man stuff? I don't know, but somebody didn't like what somebody else did. So DC got cut loose from Mattel and started cozying up to Kenner. So Kenner took the option. We made some money, and then they just kind of sat on it. And the people at DC who are supposed to be pushing it seemed very, very content to just wait for Kenner as they sat on it. And I remember having long talks with, I won't mention his name, mostly because I only remember his first name, but the guy who is DC's marketing director at the time was a lovely guy. He and I used to go motorcycling together a few times, but very laid back. It's okay. It's okay. It'll work out. And I kept saying, push it. You got to push it. You got to stay on them. And he didn't. So finally, Kenner got their stuff together and they came up with prototypes and they're going to Toy Fair. They're ready. They're going to Toy Fair with prototypes, not with anything that was really set in stone. And they get to Toy Fair and there's She-Ra, ready to go. Mattel has She-Ra. And then another company called The Lube has something called Golden Girl and her Gemstone Guardians. And I think there's a third one too, but they're all going to be in the stores a couple of months from now.
A year before Amethyst could be.
Could possibly be.
Basically. Yeah, and I remember, Gary, when there was a squib in Toy and Hobby World that just talked about how Kenner had created this new category, the 3.5-inch female fantasy fashion action figure, which is in our discussions with Kenner when it became clear that competing at Barbie size was not going to work. And so, there's been Princess Leia, but there hasn't been something like She-Ra turned out to be. And when Gary saw that little blurb in Toy and Hobby World, he said, "Mattel didn't create that category. We created the category." But we were not first to market. By the way, one thing that I think that Karen Berger owns this now. Charlie Vass, the artist Charlie Vass, did an Amethyst character that's sort of all in a line thing as part of the presentation for Kenner, and it was gorgeous. I would love to own that. DC should probably sell it to people. It's just great. I want to say something about Blue Devil, which is, and the fact that Gary was really sort of the lead. And I add things, I maybe say, hey, how about this, change in dialogue or whatever, especially in the early issues where he was working very closely with Paris because they were living near each other and I was not. So I went to, I think we were both at ChicagoCon, and I ran into Don Thompson, that now gone, but Don was co-editor of Comics Buyer's Guide, and he really liked Blue Devil, and sometimes when people like your stuff, they repeat lines of dialogue to you, which is kind of a funny thing. It's like, I never thought of that before, but he said he would give me a line. I loved what he said, and I said, "Oh yeah, that was Gary's line," and that was when they said yeah, that was Gary, and Don had only seen this dour, grudge-holding, hulking, homunculus, and it was sure that I was joking. Yeah. That it couldn't have been Gary who could be funny.
When I was, you see this benign, white bearded, grandfatherly face. I had very dark hair and dark beard. I was quite swarthy, and throughout my life before I started to whiten, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard from people, women particularly, I thought you were really interesting, but you're so intimidating. I was afraid to approach you because you're so intimidating. But yeah, I got told over and over throughout my life that I was very intimidating. So I had to figure out how to be less intimidating.
Have you figured it out?
Oh yeah, and teaching for 14 years really helped because I had to project to my students that mess with me, but otherwise I love you all, right. And that was a tough line, but I found it.
I want to talk a little bit about the artists you guys work with. Paris Collins, you mentioned, Ernie Colon. How lucky?
Let's add one because both Dan and I have worked with him. Right. Ron Randall.
Okay. Yeah. Having a stable of artists like that to match your words, did you choose them specifically, or did DC assign them to your books?
In the case of Ernie, and this really embarrassed him. He had started doing some stuff for DC, and when we were talking about who would draw Amethyst, I said that Ernie Colon guy who did the Grim Ghost at Atlas, that I really liked that. And when I told Ernie that I liked the Grim Ghost, and that's why I thought he would be great for Amethyst, he just paled, Yeah. But Ernie was very harsh on himself, so he never liked his previous work. He was always down on it. But yeah, so we asked for Ernie, and boy, did we get more than we wanted. I mean, in spades. It was just great.
Dan, have you've seen the thing I have on my wall that was Ernie's original brainstorming sketch for Amethyst? I think the camera can get it. Would you like to see that, Oren?
Definitely, 100%.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we'll just have a little downtime. But Ernie was fabulous. And Ernie, I worked with Ernie several years ago on a book about the JFK assassination, and the Warren Report, because he had gotten into this whole, when he did the 9/11 report book, into this whole nonfiction thing. And he's great. He's so versatile. He was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, Gary.
We didn't know exactly what Amethyst was going to be, and neither did Ernie. We knew that she was going to be a girl and that she was going to be dragged into another world by some alien thing. But so he was playing with stuff that ultimately didn't show up, but some that did. And this is Ernie Colon, just kind of brainstorming for Amethyst. And you can see that in one corner, she's being grabbed by a guy who looks different from the guys who grabbed her, but pretty close. And then this guy on this flying thing with all that energy, and the birdie generals and the lion thing. This was just Ernie playing. This is him doodling and thinking on paper.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to visualize this? And there it is. And this is one of my treasures because it's so germinative. It's one of the seeds for the series, because we looked at that and said, well, what can we take from this? And I'm not 100% sure that Amy being grabbed by the monster came from us. It might have come from seeing that image and saying, wow, let's do something with this.
Right. And one of the other things that happened with Ernie was that he he would pencil in basically obscene dialogue for the villains on the boards. And obviously it wasn't going to stay, right? But when it came to writing dialogue, it was like there was some insight into the characters, not just from his drawing, but from the awful things he had them saying, that really affected, both Dark Opal and Sardonyx, and probably Carnelian too, were their personalities came partly through Ernie's weird dialogue, and Gary, of course, he talked about his dark hair and everything. Gary, of course, was the model for Dark Opal.
I have that piece of art too, and
yes.
I might as well show it because it's right
should.
here. The inscription, which has mostly faded, says "For the model," and this was something Ernie did with just markers.
That's beautiful. That's incredible.
That's my inspiration that sits over my monitor.
Yeah,
and I kind of look like that. What are you doing,
something like that? Yeah. I mean, Ernie was really brilliant, and he would always he said I like to throw you guys curveballs, you know. So that's what he did. He would just do things that weren't really in the plot, and honestly, I find that with a lot of the artists I really like working with, like Tom Mandrake, who I've worked with on some stuff, is great at just, I'm going to add something here. You know, we did this miniseries Creeps for Image, and he drew a page that followed the end of my plot for the first issue. Mm-hmm. So I had to write dialogue. You know, I couldn't say, no, we're not using that page. Tom also said to me, same issue. There's a creature. It's all this genetic experimentation and blah 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 blah, and this gelatinous oozy creature that ends up being caught in one of these big industrial floor polishers that a guy is pushing through the hospital to clean the hospital floor, and then goes all over the place. And when I got Tom's pencils, I called him and I said, Tom, did you really need to go this, you know, far out with this? And he just said, well, I drew it that way. Oh, yeah. Okay, fine. Forgive the writer.
One of the things I learned early on is that artists have a much more vivid visual imagination than I do. Mm-hmm. They see stuff that I don't see. So trust the artist. You know, working with Paris, Paris and I literally worked in the same space a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And he'd have our plot, and I'd be hovering over his shoulder, and we'd be talking about what he was drawing as he was drawing it. Yeah, put that in. Yeah, and we'd laugh, and we'd kind of spark that way too. So Paris was, at least, I don't know if he and Dan shared a brain, but I think I was the conduit between, because Paris and I had that sort of sync too for a while.
Yeah.
Well, let me jump on that for a second. When you say trust the artist, for you guys, what does it take to gain that trust with, you know, the person's work and your writing?
They got to be
so
good.
If they're a Kubert School graduate, that's an automatic pass. I mean, pass in the good way. In the case of Ernie, it was he was older, and I already liked his work, you know. And Paris was, gosh, he was so immediately dynamic. You know, when we were doing the Blue Devil Summer Fun issue, there's some question about, okay, is Paris really gonna be able to turn this out on time? Do we, you know, does he need a little hand holding here? And we started out by doing it as full script. And it's like the first 3 pages are full script, and he draws them. And he tried as much as possible to break out of whatever we were saying, you know, with weird angles and stuff like that. And it looks fine, but it was, you know, it was extreme in a way that it didn't need to be. And our reaction was, oh, just give him the plot, you know, and let him be Paris, you know.
With Paris and Ron, I had done anthology stories with them, so I already knew what they were. I knew, and even though with both of them, because of the nature of the anthology stories, what they got was a script, 5 pages, 8 pages, whatever. So that was something of a constraint, but not so much, because we were all in New York. We knew each other. We talked to each other. And so we could talk it through together. And I could see right away with both of them that there was a simpatico and a connection. And when the stories were done, they were so good that it was just, there's no brainer. These were people I worked well with. And who after, I did a story, I think it might have been Paris's first or second story called Troll Bridge, about Blorgo the troll who gets sent away because he's just too much trouble. He's got a bridge, he eats people, and Wendick the wizard sends him away somewhere. And he ends up in this rain, an awful place, some other dimension. He's so miserable and he's through dank city streets, and then he sees a bridge, the biggest bridge he's ever seen. And that's how Blorgo the troll came to own the Brooklyn Bridge. So Paris did wonderful stuff with that. So we knew. With Ron, it was a story called Samurai Nightmare, about a 16th century samurai who's sent to investigate a problem with a village. 17th century, 16th century. And there's a
right here, 18th.
No, it was 16th because the Portuguese were gone by the early. The Portuguese and Spanish were gone by the beginning of the 17th century. Okay. And there's a shipwreck. It's a coastal town, and there was a Portuguese vampire on board, and he's turned everybody into vampires, and he sicks them all on Ito the samurai. And just before they get him, Ito the samurai says, "Shame on you! You have disgraced your lord. You should all commit seppuku." Mm-hmm. And they take their stakes and they kill themselves. and the vampire is so appalled by this that he freezes, which gives Ito a chance to kill him too. And the opening panel was Ito on a horse overlooking this village with the ship. And that was the splash page. And it was gorgeous. And Ron was at the beginning of his career. He was, 22 years old maybe. And it was gorgeous. And the whole play of the story was equally good. So I knew. And when Ron and I were pitching stuff to Laurie Sutton and other people, we were pitching ourselves as a team because we already had that sync.
Mm-hmm. One time when Ron and I were doing Dragonlance, one of the Dungeons and Dragons books, mm-hmm. He called me about my script. I probably wasn't writing scripts. I was writing plots, but he called me about how I had set up a scene, and he said, very sweetly, he said, Dan, because it just takes longer to do the art, I spend more time with these pages than you do, and I think that in this place it would be better if you. And it was just such a nice way of saying, pay attention, dude. you really did not do it right here. But Ron's a sweetheart. So, and the other person I worked with on those books was Jan Dursum, who another QB, who was great. When we were doing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I couldn't figure out why she wasn't being scooped up for the hot superhero books, why she wasn't doing Batman. It was sexism, I think, pretty plain and simple. But she eventually did get those books, and of course did all this great stuff with on Star Wars with John Ostrander. It's just people you can really just respond to and bounce off of. It was really good.
And then there were artists who you couldn't trust, and who were just phoning it in. It's a job. I need a job. I don't really care about this property. I don't really care about this book. And some of them were very upfront about that.
Yeah.
And we kind of stuck with them because they were pros. They were hacks. They got it in. They got the job done on time. Right. No muss, no fuss. There it was. It might lay there on the page like a dead lox, but it was done. It was there. It came in on deadline. It was good enough.
Gotcha.
But
to
have that attitude toward my babies was really tough.
Yeah. What was really hard for me, without naming names, was working with an artist whose earlier work I idolized, who was really just not into it, just getting his page rate, and not doing my script. I mean, not drawing my script, leaving things out. That was kind of heartbreaking.
Now, do you just have to, situations like that, do you just have to kind of grin and bear it? Or can you say, hey, listen, or it depends on who they are? And,
I had an editor who tried to make it work as well as it could. And which meant rewriting my dialogue to cover more things that the art wasn't covering. And it also meant, in my case, just keeping my mouth closed when I was criticized in like the comic reader way back when, criticized for kind of just having a loose padded story that didn't have much going on, and that, well, there was a lot more going on in my plot. But I'm not going to diss I'm not going to diss any artist, actually, but certainly not somebody whose work I adored. And so I just let it be. And then, and I worked with somebody else who was not as well adored, but I really loved working with. So,
Self out.
I know who they were.
Yeah, people who know my career can probably figure this out by now.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about individually projects you worked on, and I'll start with Gary for a second. With House of Mystery, I'm always so curious with books like that. How do you come up with creative stories that are not repetitive? Because you don't have like a Superman or a Batman that you can pull from. These are stories that you have to create out of pure imagination.
What if a guy is there was a book that I tried to read over and over again when I was in junior high school because I loved the cover. It was called Kabluna, and it was a novel set in the frozen Arctic. And I don't think I ever quite got through it, but French writer. But in his preface, he said, this book came out of a simple thought. What if a man hiking across the tundra fell into a crevice and got stuck, and a polar bear came along and tried to scoop him out? And that becomes a pivotal scene in the book. So that's how you generate a short story, that's a standalone short story. What if such and such? And then you see what happens. And Dan and I were both trained to do that because we're both graduates of the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop. And we worked with Harlan Ellison and Damon Knight and Kent Wilhelm and Theodore Sturgeon and Tom Dish and Samuel Delaney and Gordon Dixon, the elite of mid-20th century science fiction writers. And the whole game that those people played, yes, they wrote novels, but their bread and butter were the short stories. And we became generators of short stories. And not that we weren't to begin with, but we learned how to actually complete short stories.
Yeah, that can be a hard thing.
Right.
People ask sometimes, well, where do you get your ideas? And the answer that I have hit upon is that if you have a certain cast of mind, ideas are all around. And the hard part is telling the good ones from the bad ones.
And the more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you're thinking ideas all the time, the more ideas you think. And it just starts to be a feedback loop.
Until you explode.
Or until you get them all out.
There you go.
That's right. Yeah, that'll never happen.
Now, Dan, was it the same process with you with Dragonlance? Were you given a lot of freedom to tell whatever story you want, or there was some confined a little bit to stay within maybe?
It was interesting. It's hard to say whether TSR for the Dungeons and Dragons stuff or Paramount for the Star Trek stuff was the worst licensor I ever worked with. With Dragonlance, I was given a fair amount of freedom because we created new characters to exist in that world. So it was, and there might be interactions with the main characters of the Dragonlance novels, which I really liked. I don't know if you've ever read them. I was, so here's what struck me about the
Who wrote them?
Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman.
Okay.
Then they were written, for TSR to be a gaming, role playing game setting. And Margaret Weiss, when I met her, told me that she really liked the comic, which made me feel good. So I am not a big Star Wars fan. It's like all the tropes that show up in Star Wars, I had already seen elsewhere by the time those movies came out. So once I got past the humongous spaceship at the beginning of the first movie, that was really visually impressive, there wasn't much there. Plus, it ends with a visual quotation of Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, a Nazi propaganda film, which kind of turned me off.
Okay.
Stupid me for taking film classes in college. But so I'm not, and I thought, oh, Luke, I'm your father. That's just a gambit. That's he's not really his father. He's doing that because we've seen that 1,000 times. Well, apparently not. So anyhow, what the Dragonlance books did much, much better than Star Wars was take a group of people, a small band who don't seem to be connected in any way, who sort of fall into each other's company, and make them the linchpin for this gigantic change in the world that they're living in. Mm-hmm. It worked really, really well. I think it's never believable in Star Wars, and I think it was utterly believable in Dragonlance. Mm-hmm. So the problem I had with TSR was less about plotting or where my stories would go. That was more of a Paramount and Star Trek issue. The TSR problem was following their damn rules, of magic and this and that, and they tell me, and also the fact that I had the feeling that they never quite got that I was writing a story, not creating a D&D campaign, and it's like so I'm like numbering pages in my plot, because I'm doing it plot style for Ron and then for Jan, but and I get feedback which would be like, so on number 3 where you're saying blah blah blah, and I'm like, number 3, that's page 3. It's like, do you know what I'm doing here? And so that was, but I did get to create interesting characters, go different places with them. I was just talking online with Ron about this because he just found an old Dragonlance commission that he had done for somebody and put it on Facebook, and our main character for most of the stories was Riva Silvercrown, and I asked Ron if he says he gets a lot of requests from Dragonlance people for her, and I asked if he gets many requests for old Riva, because we did a story about the end of her life, her last battle, pretty toward the end of the series, and it was, and I thought it was a terrific story, and Ron did a wonderful, wonderful job with it, and having the freedom to jump around in time and to some extent space was really, really good. It was fun. We had a lot of freedom in that way.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I think of you guys, and I'm not trying to blow smoke, but as such creative people, coming up with characters, like you said, the stories you just said with Dragonlance. When you're given an assignment with some of DC's more established characters, do you find it confining at all to have to, stay within their history and not be able to sort of expand maybe the way you want? They want to keep it a certain way.
We grew up on those characters and I loved them dearly. Dan was much more the minutia guy than I was. Mark Waid is famously the guy who knows everything about DC. And sometimes there are like competition game things where he asks a question and come up with an answer that I've seen Mark totally dominate. And Dan can hang there with him. Dan really can. I cannot. I really cannot, because I'm not that focused on that stuff. That being said, my very first comic, I have two recollections of what my very first comic book was, and I like this one better than the other. So they're probably my first two comics. Maybe I'm 5 years old. I'm in the car. I say to my dad, I want a comic book. He stops someplace and pulls a comic book off the shelf and gives it to me. And it was the showcase that Barry Allen Flash first showed up in.
Whoa.
The very first one. So that's my first comic book, as far as I can recall. The other one that is in contention for that is a detective comic, Batman. And I remember that too, because I loved Batman. So Gil Kane's Green Lantern was, I remember reading that in the barbershop, and my monthly haircut coincided with the new comics. So every time I went in for my monthly haircut, there was a new Green Lantern. So I have great love for these characters. So give me them to play with once or twice with Dan, great. I kind of wish that somebody had said to me, take one of them and be the regular writer for 2 or 3 years, the way Dan was with Wonder Woman. Never happened. And I'm not sure what I would have done with it. But, you know what each one is, but there's so much room, as we see. You can just work new changes on every one of these characters and still maintain their fundamental integrity.
Right.
Or violate their integrity, which I think is a mistake, and we've seen that a lot too.
Right. Yeah, I really like the opportunity to dig in and find something different, new, whatever. I think Gary and I, both done individually and together, have did the Batman and Superman team up books.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good place to just dive in and let's see what you're going to do with Superman and this character, Batman and this character. Like for instance, I did Superman in the House of Mystery. DC Comics presents number 53. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a Mr. Mixes-Pillow story, and there's lots of stuff going on in it. But the key was, for me, I found a new way for Superman to trick Mixes-Pillow into saying his name back, and that's what the story was about. That was really cool,
That's all one of those stories can be about.
Yes, and if you want to know, the Superman keeps calling him by a name that isn't his name. He calls him Mr. Swizzlesticks or Mr. MX Missile System, which was something back in the 80s. And every time he says it, the imp says not Swizzlesticks, Mixes-Pillow. And finally, Superman says, "Okay, Mr. Kilpazixum," and he says, "Not Kilpazixum." Oops. So that was my little joke. I also had, it was a Halloween story, so I had Jimmy Olsen dressed up as Thor, but not Marvel's Thor, and Kurt Swan drew it, and it was just, it was great. And then this was not a team up story, but when Bob Schreck was editor at, he said, "Sure, I'd love to have you do something. Come up with something I haven't seen." Okay? It's like, that took a few tries. But what I finally came up with, and this was another one that Tom Mandrake drew, which makes it wonderful. What I came up with was, okay, Gotham City, northern industrial kind of falling on not so great times city, has got to be like all those other cities, like New York and Boston and Detroit and Chicago. It's got to have a Catholic archdiocese that plays a significant role in the life and politics of the city. And that was my entree into the story. And Bob said, "Oh yeah, that would be the case. Let's see what that's like." So I had a murder mystery where a priest was killed, another priest was a suspect, but Two-Face was also a suspect, and he, and it's all about. So it's about a number of things. Number one, it's about the Catholic Church in Gotham City. Number two, the priest who's a suspect in the murder ends up being somebody who, like Commissioner Gordon, who was not in continuity at the time, he'd been sidelined, could be a normal human being that Batman would treat as an equal. Very, very few of those, okay? And, if something had happened, if things had gone the right way, that'd be a character somebody else would use. He'd show up in movies, I'd make money. It didn't happen. But the other thing was doing something with Two-Face that hadn't been done before. And my priest character is the one who has an insight into Two-Face that Batman has never had, which is that the coin, right? The two-headed coin, one face scarred. Do you do good or do you do evil? That is not Two-Face's coin. That is Harvey Dent's coin. That is Harvey Dent's, whatever's left of him, inside Two-Face, trying to make the odds a little better for good to be the result, right? Now, the priest knows this in part because we opened the story with Harvey or Two-Face, whatever you want to call him, in the confessional at the church and talking to this priest. So he's talked to them a while. But I thought that also was a good insight. And I'll stop tooting my own horn in a minute. I called the cathedral in Gotham City St. Dismas. Dismas was the good thief crucified with Jesus, patron saint of thieves and whatever. And I said, that's a great name for the cathedral in Gotham City. And then in the TV show Gotham, they actually had a cathedral scene set at Gotham Cathedral. I mean, Gotham Cathedral. Do you know how the Catholics? I'm a Jew, but I was raised in a Catholic town. But I, do you really understand how they were? They don't name cathedrals after the city that they're in. And I have given you a good name, and I wouldn't even ask for money for it. I was just, but
I recall that I actually was offered something ongoing for one of the main characters. Dan and I had touched Aquaman a couple of times, and
Not that way. Not that way.
That was my gotcha question.
I just didn't have a feel for him. It was that simple. I did not have a feel for the character. And Bob Greenberger offered me what became the Atlantis Chronicles, thing that kind of made Peter David, and I refused it. And I just don't have a feel for this character. And
we also refused the adaptation of Clan of the Cave Bear, which was
I did the adaptation of what's the Sylvester Stallone movie with?
Oh, that's right. Garbage Man? No, Demolition.
Demolition Man.
Say again?
Demolition Man?
Demolition Man.
Demolition Man.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure it was 3 issues or 4 issues, but that was something Alan Gold tossed to me, and they had not chosen an ending yet for the script. So I had their script to go with, but they hadn't chosen an ending. So I gave him 2 different ones. And I think one of them correlated with the ending that they did come up with.
Well, Dick Giordano asked us to adapt the novel Clan of the Cave Bear, which was very popular. And we ended up saying, nobody speaks in this novel. I mean, literally, they don't have language, okay? And that's going to be hard to do in comics.
Yeah.
And he says, I see your point. We'll probably just better leave that aside. And then, of course, they made a movie from it that tanked. So,
Daryl Hannah. Here's a story that I've told a zillion times, going back to Kenner. We had lunch with 3 vice presidents of Kenner, and we're sitting around a table, and one of them says to me, "So who's the best writer in comics?" And without missing a beat, I said, "We are." At which, 2 days later.
That was the correct answer, but go ahead.
No, it wasn't, because 2 days later, I read Alan Moore's first Swamp Thing, The Anatomy Lesson.
Yeah.
And I said, maybe not.
But
that was a really, really good comic book.
Yeah, it was. But the thing is, it's the who's the best or which is the best is a silly question.
It is.
And there are so many good answers. How do you judge these things? I like the HBO Watchmen TV show more than I like the Watchmen comic.
Okay.
For one thing, the TV show explained the incredibly stupid ending of the Watchmen comic. Which is good, because it was really the smartest man alive does not build his plot around the idea that an external threat will unite the world for more than about 45 minutes.
Zack Snyder actually improved on that.
Oh, yeah?
He did. I don't know if you've seen the Zack Snyder Watchmen movie, but
no, I haven't.
He gets rid of the giant alien octopus manufactured thing and has Ozymandias pin the whole thing on Dr. Manhattan, which is much better, because it's a deceptive, convoluted set up a patsy kind of thing, and Dr. Manhattan is not the character you'd imagine would be set up as a patsy, but he is, and it was a much better gimmick than the big alien monster. Visually, it wasn't, I guess. So visually, it didn't have that big double-page spread of the dead monster on top of the building and all the bodies. But in terms of plot sense, it was so much better. Mm-hmm. What I don't recall, though, and I'm not going to watch the movie again to see, is what was it, if there's not the big alien monster, what was it that the comedian saw out the plane window that so much freaked him out? Because then why does Ozymandias have to kill him? And I don't remember. They may have covered that. but that changes another element of the plot. But
somebody will write in.
I think.
And now that we've done all these spoilers for a 36
just check it out. I just have one more question. I want to be mindful of your time, but you talk about movies, you talk about Swamp Thing. Blue Devil was in the Swamp Thing.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, Dan Cassidy was in Swamp.
But there was a devil who was blue.
Right.
That wasn't Blue Devil.
But our Blue Devil was not. And look, they're allowed to make these changes. That's fine, but it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. It had nothing. And here's the thing that they, you know how Dan was talking about how you are yelling at the screen because there's something so obvious. So he's got the mask, right? And I'm yelling at the screen, put the mask on, put the mask on. You put the mask on and then you turn it. He doesn't put the mask on. And then he leaves it behind. Put the mask on. That will do it. Oh, he didn't put the mask on. So instead, they end up with what I understand was a $100,000 suit that was blue, that looked exactly like the Floronic Man suit, except that the Floronic Man suit was green.
And then they just had him sort of show up and lay waste to all those people in a factory.
Oh, yeah, that's not Blue Devil.
I was going to say, like, it was gory and violent, and I'm saying this is a fun book. Like, there's action. Yeah. But he's not a straight murderer who's,
Should we talk about how many people have written Blue Devil who don't understand the character? Because that could take us to another hour.
There's one who did. Bill Willingham.
Yeah. Bill Willingham did the best job of handling the character. When Shadowpact was coming.
I do have a story.
Okay, I'll tell my story after.
Yeah, last story. Somehow, through the magic of Facebook, I connected with Jeff Johns. And we discovered that we shared a birthday.
A bathroom or a birthday, one or the other.
We shared a birthday, and we both were Michigan State graduates. And so he said, let me call you sometime. We'll talk. So we did. I sat out here on the balcony on a beautiful sunny day, and we had this wonderful conversation. And somehow I got on this very thing, that Blue Devil is a misunderstood character. And then I started to talk
forgetting that Jeff had written the character, you mean?
No idea.
Yeah.
And at some point, I start to talk about something Dan and I talked about, where in some Blue Devil featured comic book, Neberos is portrayed as a demon that you bargain with. And I used our line, no, Neberos is truly stupid. Neberos is not a soul taker. He either eats you or he calls you little brother. That's it. That's Neberos. And all he cares, he's got the line that Dan reminds me that I said once was, he's stupid in the way that only the truly powerful can be.
Yes.
And he's really stupid. So I'm going on about this with Jeff and kind of silence, but okay. Conversation, and we very nice conversation, lovely, yes, and we hang up, and it might have been Dan who reminded me that exact thing was something that Jeff Johns had written.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from him.
And Jeff has told me that he loves Blue Devil.
Yeah,
I don't doubt it, but there's a way that you can love something and either you don't get it or you put too much of your own spin or whatever, and you end up losing the thing, right? But Bill Willingham did get Blue Devil, even though he had to do the version of him in the black T-shirt, when Shadowpact was first coming out, I was at the San Diego Con and I saw Bill, so I walk up to him from behind and I say, hey, Bill, and so I'm 6'4", so sometimes people turn around and go, but I've known Bill for a long time, so he just shudders for a minute. And I think it's, was I too imposing or something? Was I too intimidating for Gary? But no, he says, oh, Dan, just the person I was hoping and dreading running into. because he didn't know what I was going to say about his work with Blue Devil and Shadowback. But it was really good. He totally understood the character.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak to me. This has been awesome. We'd love to have you back on. And thank you guys so much for all the work that you've done for us comic fans through the year. It's really incredible stuff.
Yeah, if you have anybody you can tell.
Thank you for remembering us.
Stuff.
Yeah, thank you for remembering us.
Oh, not a problem. and where can fans find you? I mean, I know Facebook, but do you guys are on Twitter or Instagram or
Facebook is it for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Dan Mishkin. I have a website that is so dead, you would have to dig probably through the dark web before you would find it. Maybe if I have something big coming out someday, I will actually revive my website. But who knows if that will ever happen?
Hey, stranger things happen. You guys are a talented individuals and an even more talented group. So we'd love to see more stuff from you guys.
Okay. We'll work on our song and dance routine.
There you go.
From your lips to DC's ear, or to anybody's ear.
Anybody's ear.
Anybody who would pay me to do stuff that I like doing.
So, what a cool interview with these guys. They've done so much in the industry. I think they have so much more to give. And, just to hear a duo speak about their process was really so cool.
Yeah, you guys did a great job with this one. You don't hear about too many writing duos, and like you said, to hear their creative process and, to hear about, the creation of so many interesting characters was really cool. So great job. And, look, you guys are not hearing things wrong. Oren is the one that introduced this episode. It can happen. Okay. So calm down.
Dreams do come true.
It is.
To reiterate, it was fun hearing from co-writers. I'm, as I've said many times before, sort of always interested in the process of how these things come together. And I always think, more than one writer, that's too many cooks in the kitchen. How does that possibly work as a collaboration? So it was especially illuminating to hear about how they worked together and created these characters and stories. But that'll do it for another episode of Dollar Bin Bandits. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe. And we will see you next time, Banditos. The Dollar Bin Bandits are Oren Phillips, Joe Marcello, and Mike Farah. New episodes are released on Wednesdays, with bonus episodes some Fridays, every week. Some episodes are available on YouTube at youtube.com/dollarbinbandits. You can follow us on Twitter at DBBandits and on Instagram and Facebook at Dollar Bin Bandits. Want to get really nerdy? Join the Dollar Bin Banter group on Facebook. Please help us grow by rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you found this episode. Thank you, and we'll see you next time, partners.